Welcome and good evening. The board meeting will come to order at 5:01 p.m. Good evening and thank you for attending the Albuquerque Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board meeting on December 9th, 2024. Ms. Barela, can I please get a roll call? Oh, Jesus, stand by. Ms. Barela, can I get a roll call? Member roll call vote, please.
Aaron Calderon.
Present.
Xander Bolionitz.
Present.
Eduardo Budenaro.
Present.
Gail Oliver. Rowan Weimark.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Barela. For the record, Member Oliver is out on approved absence. The next order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
Of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. You okay? The next order of business will be the approval of the agenda. Do any board members have any proposals to changes for the agenda as written? No. Perfect. With that being said, Ms. Barrera,
I make a motion to approve the agenda as written.
Second.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Barrera, can I get a roll call vote on the vote for the agenda as written?
Member Bolionitz.
Approved.
Member Budenaro.
Approved.
Member Calderon.
Approved.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barrera. I'm never writing my notes at 1 a.m. in the morning again. The next order of business is the review and approval of the minutes from November 14th of 2024's board meeting. Do any board members have any requested changes from the minutes?
No.
No.
Perfect. I make a motion for approval of the minutes as written. Can I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Barrera, can I get a roll call vote for approval of the agenda of the minutes as written?
Member Bolionitz.
Approved.
Member Budenaro.
Approved.
Member Calderon.
Approved.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barrera. The next order of business is going to be public comment. We have not received any public comment written through email or in person. With that being said, the next order of business is going to be reports from city departments. First department up is going to be APD, the Internal Affairs Professional Standards Division, Acting Commander Kenneth Johnston.
Good evening, board. Just the quick updates. I don't have the stats. I don't know if you received them either. I can't confirm. In general, we closed in November about 58 cases, and we are opened back up to about 108 cases. So we went up compared to the previous month. That's just more intake, unfortunately. But we're within timelines in all our cases. We're still closing cases generally at the 90-day mark. I don't have many cases right now. I think it's 6 that are on extension for the full 120-day, which by most of the CBAs and rules and regs that we have are 120-day investigations, except for a few that involve M&C series contract employees. But other than that, I don't really have any other updates for you guys. I stand for questions.
Do any board members have any questions?
Not at this time.
Not at this time.
Can I get clarification on the 6 that you were talking about? Is it 6 outstanding cases?
It's 6 cases that are on extension. So
Okay.
basically what that means is that the investigation, once it gets to about the 90-day mark, I have to approve for it to go over. That's more of an internal mechanism to make sure that cases are tracking, that they're on time, and that we're not missing anything. In these cases, I believe most of them needed another interview, and in some cases, the investigator had a higher priority case that they needed to finish first. So they're not in danger of missing timelines. It's just based on once I get it and I agree that yes, it does need to be extended or it does need this extra interview, whatever it may need, then I approve it. I try to keep that number very low. Right now it's at 6 out of the 108 cases that I have.
Is that lower than usual or is that standard?
It's normal. We've had it at higher levels. I don't like to have a large extension group because It is getting closer to that 120 days, and I don't want us to ever go past the timeline, because then that removes our ability to discipline the employee. Absolutely.
Any further questions?
No.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. Moving on to our next agenda item will be item number 2, Internal Affairs Force Division, Commander Scott Norris.
And Chair Calderon, just to let you know, we did receive an email shortly before the meeting that both the IAPS and IFD reports would probably not be available from the data analytics. There was a little bit of a flaw, so they'll get them to you afterwards.
Thank you for the update.
Sure. But I can kind of speak to just some current things that are going on in IAFD, at least within the past month. So currently, we're actually carrying 4 open officer-involved shooting cases right now. One of them will be closed here this week. The other 3 are still in investigations right now, so that's kind of keeping those investigators busy. Our investigators right now are carrying an average of about 7 cases per investigator, which is kind of a high case number for them, especially relative to our strict timelines that we need to adhere by. But one thing that we're doing too is we're trying to increase our number of investigators as much as we possibly can. One flaw that we kind of found was some of the, I guess, the job description and requirements to even apply to be a civilian investigator. So when the civilian investigators, about a year ago, they went from unclassified to classified employees. So with that came some protections that they did not have before. I guess on the negotiating table, if that's what we want to call it, I wasn't a part of that. There were some stipulations under which we could classify them, and the job description and requirements for those were integrated within those that job description and job requirements. We found that's kind of hurt us in terms of the hiring pool that we can choose from. People who otherwise would be relatively good candidates and qualified, we feel, to come on as IFD investigators, they've been disqualified, so they can't really even apply because they don't meet those requirements. And speaking with Central HR as well as one of my deputy chiefs, we were able to modify that job description and job requirements so we can choose from a larger pool of applicants. To give you an example, some of my better investigators are actually some of my civilian investigators who came over, more than a year ago and even before I actually got there. And if they were to apply for this job today, they wouldn't meet the job requirements. So that didn't make much sense to us. We want as large of a pool that we can hire from as possible. So that's in the works. That's not yet instituted, but that's something that we're looking at doing. I'm looking forward to the status hearing tomorrow in federal court, just to hear what DOJ, the monitors have to say, our replies. We're expecting positive news, or at least a positive vibe coming out of that status hearing. And then with IAFD, we meet with our independent monitors, the associate monitors or deputy monitors, if that's what you want to call them, that are responsible for monitoring the paragraphs we're responsible for. So we meet with them on Wednesday too. So we're looking forward to meeting with them. They're here all week. So that's going to be my day where I can meet with them and answer any questions that they have, or me ask them any questions and see how they feel our progress, if that we maintain this operational compliance, that we're going into our second reporting period, maintaining that operational compliance. And I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
I do have just one quick.
Yes, sir.
one. You say you have 7 cases per investigators?
Yes, it's about on average.
On average, what would be enough? What's the ideal? Where would you like to see it?
Ideally, probably between 3 and 4. It's just, and the reason why that's ideal for us is it does several things. We can get those cases completed in a shorter amount of time because they would have just those cases to concentrate on. And also it doesn't run the risk of, them being task saturated and looking at cases not as with a fine-tooth comb like we want them to look at those cases. It just prevents less kickbacks. It'll get to the first-line supervisor. The first-line supervisor will see some inconsistencies that weren't resolved, see some holes in the investigation, or things that need to be done that they feel would make for a stronger, more thorough investigation. It kind of reduces those resubmissions from the sergeant level to to the investigator level, and then also from the deputy commander level to the sergeant level. So it just kind of helps with efficiency and quality of cases, we feel.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Any other questions?
And I appreciate that due diligence because I've seen the difference between 2023 cases, the initial ones, to 24 cases. And you can see that significant difference in detail.
Right.
And, you know, the amount of information provided that I
Sure.
find super helpful.
Some of that actually had to do with us kind of making sure that we're concentrating on the most important things. We had maybe how do we say this? Some personnel in management in 2023 that were really concentrating on things that weren't necessarily significant, where these investigators and detectives needed to go in such great detail. For instance, escorting a compliant individual to a car, analyzing that and going into detail. Well, there's nothing to analyze. The guy's in handcuffs and you're walking him to a car. You know, so those types of details and those types of things, that's a call on my end, saying, hey, listen, we don't need to be concentrating on something that is not a force event within a force event. We need to be concentrating on something that is a use of force or potential use of force, low-level control, categorizing that correctly to make sure that we're not making a mistake in categorizing something that's low-level control that really should be like a level 1 use of force. Another thing that you'll see is pretty soon when you start seeing some other some cases like coming up in 24, you are going to be seeing how the investigative form, if you guys actually see the investigative form, that's actually changed too. Just for flow purposes, for efficiency purposes, there's no reason on earth why I should have an investigator detective write a 27-page report on an empty hand takedown that caused a scrape. None whatsoever. That's not efficient at all. And it burns our investigators out, it burns our detectives out, and that's not what we're looking for in our investigations. What we're looking for is, do we have a lawful objective? How did we get there? Are we supposed to be there? What was the level of resistance? What was the level of force to overcome that resistance? And is it minimal, reasonable? And is it minimal, reasonable? And does it meet all? And is it necessary? And are there any misconduct? Are there any issues of misconduct? Those are the types of things that we really need to be concentrating on, to include any equipment issues, training issues, supervision issues, things like that. So you will see a little more condensed version of some of our reports, is because we kind of cut out the unnecessary fat that didn't necessarily need to be written about. If it doesn't raise your eyebrows on an OBRD, why are we writing about it? Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions? No? Okay.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate that. Moving on to our next line item will be ACS, Mr. Jeffrey Bustamante, the Deputy Director for ACS.
Good afternoon, everybody. Excited to be here again, a little bit earlier in the month, so our data analysis on November and volume isn't quite completed yet either, but once we have it, I'll kick it over. That way we can get it distributed. Really excited to join you, also with my son here, joining us today. Anecdotally, over November, we saw similar trends continue that I even kind of reported a little bit last month, of kind of the sense of urgency and then some of the holiday stresses, you know, increasing. As we've seen, while it is not a huge amount of our calls, the suicidal ideation calls do kind of continue, and we will see those kind of prominently through the holiday season. Just so you know, when we respond to those, we respond and we stabilize and ensure that the individual is stable. We will do things like safety planning and the rest to ensure that they're also sustainable beyond that. Beyond that, though, it is a lot of unsheltered calls continue. As I mentioned, last time, our winter transportation is up and running, so at night from 8 p.m. to about 7 a.m. typically, we do transportation no matter what. However, as our peers in other first response departments can definitely attest to, is sometimes that transportation is a big time lift. And so we built a program that a monitor and a driver can go and pick individuals up and get them to, whether it's the gateways or what have you. And the monitor is there to, A, keep an eye on things and ensure safety, so we're sending out teams of 2, but also to start the referral paperwork while they're on route. So last year, it was really successful, and we had only started in January, so we were excited to see that up and running from November 1st onward. Other than that, again, the trend line does continue of about 3,000 to 4,000 calls per month, prominently up and down the up and down 66. Though the call types do change, and when I get the data over, I do invite you to kind of look at how per council district, how the dispositions can sometimes change. Some of it's in there. We also can eventually, like, would be happy to do a deeper dive if you ever wanted us to, or answer specific areas, because I know that would be really exciting. To just understand that the foothills calls are different from the southeast calls, are different from the west side and the rest. Other, exciting things. So we're actually wrapping up some of our analysis around our summer and nonviolence into a package. We do actually have a contractor supporting us in that to make sure that we get fresh eyes. It's not just the eyes who ran it that are kind of running through it and talking to the community. So that'll be a qualitative and quantitative report that we bring out along with the data that, like I mentioned, we'll happily make available. We have done a couple rapid hire events. Vacancy rate is a common thing and a challenge for any department. Ours is usually pretty solid, but as new positions get funded by council or through the generosity of both council and the mayor supporting it, we want to make sure that we're getting those filled and getting teams out onto the streets, because that's the commitment, right, to the community. And so we did 2 rapid hire events, one at the end of November and one to start December, and they were considerably successful. Not everybody was a perfect fit for ACS, but Central HR was a great partner and actually came down and screened them for other jobs that were currently there and would start to get that process going. It's really handy for us because, just without going too far into detail, our hiring includes all the background checks, including the criminal justice system, the CJIS system. We screen them for the positions that require it before we do an offer letter, and it all takes time. So at areas where we can trim down the bureaucracy, still get the transparency and all the good parts of that time, but also accelerate it so that we can get teams in, is always great. And so I think we had about 38, 40 people at last week's drop by, and a series of them got interviews and started getting screened. This is really good news because in January, we are moving towards our next academy, starting with the first full pay period in January. That will be expanded. It's, again, a multi-month academy that also has typically between 5 and 6 weeks of on-the-job training. This academy will have some OJT sprinkled into the classroom weeks, if you will, so that they can see the practical application of what they're being trained on. Beyond that, just kind of getting ready to continue through the season, and of course, budget season has begun, and so we're just getting ready for that and everything that'll come in the spring. But I'm happy to answer any questions folks may have. Yes.
I have a question about the academy. It goes for how long?
Chairman Member Wymark, it so typically goes for about nearly 2 months of instruction and 5 or 6 weeks of on-the-job training. The reason that I say it that way is every once in a while, like the holidays or what have you, we will have them train through some of the holidays. Sometimes they don't. But we are looking towards a 3-month academy of instruction and then about 6 weeks of on-the-job training after that. So about 4 to 4.5 months total to get them prepared. And during that time, it's everything from motivational interviewing to compassion fatigue to proxemics and to a little bit of all of it, moral injury, language access, all of it. And I can get you a list.
Do you have
everything we
any
train on.
external agencies involved in the training?
We sure do. So our police department is generous enough to train us on things like situational awareness and a lot of what's happening in the police department. We get lifesavers training and other like stabilization, very early stuff from the fire department that is meant to be the minutes until fire can get there to make sure that we're helping and additive to whatever the EMTs arrive to. We get training from our domestic violence and sexual assault nonprofits. They actually come spend a day with us, talk through some of the indicators, how not to re-traumatize, how to make the proper referrals and the rest. We get trained by the Grief Center on grief, not only for the individuals we support, but also for ourselves. Our teams do happen across bodies, and sometimes that can be triggering for them as well. And so what it means, we have an employee assistance program, Cerna Solutions, on contract who does support to us, our responders, but they also come and talk to us about self-care, moral injury, what I mentioned earlier, proxemics, like getting along with your partner in your car. Like, that's more time than I even personally spend with my partner, is an 8 or 10-hour shift. And what does that mean? How do you make sure that you're supporting one another, you have your partner's back, you're doing the things you need to do? So that's just a snapshot, but I'm more than happy to give you a full list, and we can highlight those that are offered by our partners.
That's fine. So while they're going through the academy, you don't have that extra cadre on the streets while they're going, before they go through the on-the-job training? That's a very obvious question, I know, but.
Oh, no, it's fair. It's one we receive a handful of times. So no, they are not actually going out as set teams until they get through the academy and they pass. We do have individuals who don't. We also have individuals who, the responding to 911 calls for service is not for everybody, right? Even with a deep passion for the work. Some folks just realize it's not for them. Some folks actually don't pass, and so we move, on from those candidates. However, for those that do graduate, then they're put into a miniature shift bid before they sync up to the larger shift bid with our overall organization, and they go out on their own. With that said, they will go out as part of the on-the-job training for the shift that they expect they will end up in. So they'll get exposure with the graveyard teams, be additive to the graveyard teams, especially as they move further into OJT. We have to see them take those calls before we're comfortable sending them out on their own. So.
One very brief follow-up question. My understanding of ACS is that you didn't respond to 911 calls.
We do. We do. About any given month, about 70 to 80% of our calls come from either 911 or 242 cops, which goes in to the same emergency communications center. So yeah, it's the bulk of it. We do proactives in 311 as well, though.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
I do have a question for the summer report that you're coming out with. Do you guys have an ETA on that report?
So I can work to get our overall, just kind of raw, not the raw data, but the raw summary data, if you will, over within the next week or two. And then the follow-up analysis and some of our community conversations that we've had with the partners. We are hoping to have by January. It depends on the production of it and if there needs to be an extension of the rest. Right. But I'll work to get the data over so that you can see kind of the big round stuff.
Yeah, I've been curious about it for a while, so I just was curious about the ETA.
Absolutely, and I apologize to under-deliver on that. I know I mentioned November initially, so we'll make sure to get that delivered.
Awesome, thank you.
Absolutely.
No other questions? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Moving on to our next item on the agenda will be our city attorney. And forgive me, please, I forgot your name already.
Okay. David Lopez, and I'm sitting in for Lindsay Roseborough. Good afternoon, or yeah, good afternoon. I was going to say good evening, but I believe because we're still at work, I say it's the afternoon.
I almost said good morning, so you're fine.
Sure. So there's not much to report, which is usually why I'm here instead of Lindsay. She usually has insight into everything that's going on. We have the site visit this week. I think as we're all aware of. So that's going on. We're working on updating IMR 20. But I think what's most important is that we understand that IMR 21 ends on January 31st, last day of the year. I'm not sure if the members have done the training, ride-alongs, and all those sorts of things, but there's a looming deadline for that. I guess about it. And for any questions, if I can answer.
Do you have any questions? No. No questions. Yeah, our training's up to date, thankfully.
Oh, awesome.
I broke it down a little different. Like, the biggest one was like ride-alongs. That's the most consistent one. So I broke that down to quarters, basically, so one per quarter. And so they're actually, I finished mine actually this past Saturday. I was like,
I got mine in 2 weeks.
yeah, I was like, yeah, he has his pretty soon, so he'll be fine. And then he's doing his last one now, and then you have one more, right?
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
I guess, but no, thank you for that reminder. We need it sometimes.
We'll do it.
Cool. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. With that being said, we're moving on to our next agenda item, which will be City Council. And my apologies, sir, I did not get your name.
Button over here.
It should be live.
Okay. Members of Chairman Calderon, members of the board. My name is Kevin Marr. I'm Deputy Director and General Counsel with the City Council. I don't have any update on behalf of City Council. Just want to say thank you for your service. We're appreciative of really how well this board is functioning, and we just met with the monitoring team today and got a glowing report on all the work that you've been doing. So just want to say thank you very much.
Thanks, sir. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Moving on to our next agenda item will be the CPCs.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I am Martisa on behalf of the Community Policing Council. So for the November report, we had a few activities that we accomplished since the last meeting. We had our first year and end of the year CPC Christmas dinner, which we had this past Saturday. The dinner was eventful. It took place at the Albuquerque Museum with food catered by Slate Street Cafe and partially funded by the City Council. We hosted about 85 people and treated the guests to speeches from Mayor Tim Keller and APD Officer Rob DeBuck. And Kelly spoke about planning for next year and reaching out to new groups. Additionally, we arranged our yearly meeting with Mayor Keller, which is scheduled to take place on January 30th. The mayor's office also held out January 27th as a backup possibility in case of an emergency. The council officers, outgoing and incoming, will be invited. Kelly had met with the university area commander, Ray Del Greco, on starting a university area command CPC. We split the current council into a southeast and university section, with the university beginning a 6-meeting yearly schedule in January. We initially be meeting at the university area command headquarters before moving to a community center. We are short with only 4 members and looking for new members to join the university CPC. Kelly had attended the Ridgecrest Neighborhood Association meeting to see if anyone wanted to join. And we are having our last 2 yearly CPC meetings this week, which is the Foothills meeting that's going on now. And their topic is the Metro Court Diversion Programs. And tomorrow's the Northeast CPC meetings, which will be held on Zoom only. For that topic is what directions we will focus our efforts for next year in the Northeast Area Command. In January, we will have elections in all councils for council chairs, vice chairs, and officers. It looks as though most of our officers will stay unopposed and probably have new officers in the Southeast and University Area Command. We are also trying to set up 2 field trips for the CPCs at the end of the year, one to the Real-Time Crime Center and the other to the Gateway Center for the unhoused, and all the members will be invited. Finally, we are looking into new methods of working our recommendation process. As we are looking into presenting a unified form with CPOA-B on recommendations and utilizing the CPOA analysis staff to give us a clear picture on what we're recommending. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Do we have any questions, Martisa?
No question.
Go ahead, Ron.
Matisa, I'm assuming that the Valley Area Command doesn't have a CPC meeting this month because it's at the end of the month.
Yeah. The only 2 that are going on this month is Foothills and Northeast.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Martisa.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Moving on to the next agenda item will be the mayor's office. Mr. Doug Small, Director of Public Affairs. I don't believe he's present, so we will skip that. Moving on to the next agenda item will be the CPOA. Ms. Diane McDermott, Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair and Board. So the CPOA received 61 complaint intakes from November 1st to November 30th. 26 of those were assigned for investigation between CPOA and some that were already either in IAPS's or IFD's house or needed to go over to there. 17 were driving complaints that were resolved with the employee supervisor, and 18 were miscellaneous, where, again, that category can cover variety of things. Either there was insufficient information, it was deemed that APD was not actually part of the incident, or the citizen was actually just asking more for information, and we were able to actually satisfy that information provided to them, and they didn't have any other additional complaint. There was one commendation that was received during the month of November. Moving on to some of the topics. So the board had made a request for firearms instruction and training, and particularly in red dot. And so APD has asked the board to provide some possible dates towards the end of the month of December or into January that would work for the board. This would be a daytime session, so something that would work for most of you anyway. It would be basically a truncated thing, because the training that the officers receive is like over the course of 2 days and is, you know, fairly extensive. So this is going to be designed for your interests, for your needs, for the use of force that you do, the review, and just kind of focus on your questions and things like that. So if you can provide to me in an email any pretty much blackout dates that, like, these are absolutely you can't do, and then we'll work with their scheduling to do that, as well as any questions that you individually may have to just kind of prepare the presenters for what you might be looking for. That would be also helpful. If you have any questions, of course, just contact the office regarding that. We have an ongoing initial conversation with a vendor regarding a mediation program. So that's the expectation of the ordinance, and the CASA does talk about it in certain circumstances. We recognize that there are several complaints that would be more appropriate for a mediation resolution rather than an actual investigation process. So we are on the early side of it still, but that is something that we have been actively working on trying to get going. Additionally, there have been some conversations progressed during somewhat the site visit and prior about a new home for the CPOA, basically. So it's still pretty preliminary, but we are definitely in a more positive trajectory. There have been actual discussions of where and some possible what it's going to look like, but there's a lot of city council still has to approve certain things. There's still quite a bit of logistics that have to be worked out. There's budgeting, all those types of things. So it's encouraging, but not a settled issue as of yet. We did post for a senior investigator, a lead investigator, and 2 standard investigators just recently. And, well, actually, it just closed recently, I should say. And we received some of the applications. We haven't received all of the applications for all of the postings yet. So we will be going through those and hopefully doing all of our interviewing by the end of the year and having selections done at least for some of those positions. So we're very encouraged. We need more manpower, and so this will help quite a bit. Unfortunately, as everything is, there is a learning curve, and so even though we may hire these folks, they will not be able to start, you know, running off the gate right away. That'll be a learning curve on training and things like that. But we're very happy that we're going to hopefully get some more people. There was some discussion, and we'll reach out to the board members an email of what we're going to need. So we're looking at having an enhanced background. Of course, when you joined the board, you had a background check, but it was a pretty basic background check. To access certain things and take a look at certain things, there's an enhanced, I just kind of was informed here a few minutes ago that it might not be what we were originally talking about. Some of you were sent a packet, but it's going to be something that gives you a little bit more robust of a background so that you can access things like the RTCC and some ECC, those types of things. So to be determined to give you more info, but just when you receive that email saying this is what we need from you, just respond back and say, okay, here's the information. So that's the purpose of it, to get you having the access to certain things and be able to review certain other additional things for ride-along changes, things like that. And then, as has already been mentioned a few different times, we have the hearing tomorrow. I will be in attendance. Aaron, the chair, Member Calderon, did sign off on the letter that we had jointly written. We had talked about the topics. So those have been posted. You probably all received them in your email, the amici letters. So I'll be at the courthouse I believe Chair Calderon will be in attendance, probably virtually. And any board member, of course, you're welcome to go, but more than likely, you'll be sent a link for attending virtually. And it's just to hear how things are going and hear the concerns that the community may have. There's 2 other amicis scheduled to speak, I believe APD Forward and Community Coalition. So they'll express their concerns and statements about how the CASA process is going, and those are all obviously important considerations for the board to take on, because the board is one of the representatives of the community concerns. With that, I will stand for questions before I move on to the non-concurrent.
Perfect, thank you. Do any board members have any questions?
I got 2 questions. Unless Ed, you unmuted, so you can go first if you want.
I got muted to say I have no questions.
Oh. You guys were talking about positions, which is awesome. I know we talked about a social media website person. Is there movement on that, or is that delayed until we get more investigators?
So the investigations is kind of our bread and butter for the agency. We absolutely have to get that going to a more degree. But we do have community engagement that has been going on social media-wise. We've been posting on X regarding our meetings, regarding the subcommittees, regarding policy things. So we try and make sure that at minimum those pieces of information are out there. And then we will be having a position within the agency that's evolving some, that we're waiting for HR to work through and approve some of that as well. So that's in the works, but it's not finalized yet. So I can't go into a whole lot of detail.
No, it makes sense. I knew there was something, so I just was curious. Another thing that I don't know if this is the right area, but I know we talked about doing a RTCC tour. Do we have an ETA on that, or do we need to do the enhanced background checks first before we could set the tour up?
Yeah, a little bit of that. So the question had come from the deputy chief was, did you have this type of background or not? And so depending on the answer of that would depend on what type of RTCC tour you received. So we're, at his suggestion, we're talking about this, like we just mentioned, the background enhancement that you may all have to review or be a part of, so that you could then have the more comprehensive tour of RTCC. So that's why that's in the works. Let's see which comes first, basically, or it may be take the one so that you can kind of get at least the initial view, and then maybe later have a more involved one. So that's kind of where that's at. Cool. If the board wants to have what's available now, that can be probably arranged fairly quickly. And then if you want to revisit that when maybe enhanced backgrounds are done, that's also a possibility. I just have to confer with the deputy chief regarding that.
Yeah, I think we're better off waiting. Yeah. It's a holiday season anyways, so the weeks are short and relatively busy for the most part outside of this. So I would rather do the diligence of getting the proper background checks done, and then being able to do a one-shot deal and get it done correctly, and we have a full overview of RTCC and PCC if necessary. Any dissent?
No, I agree with that one. I know I would want to go dive deep into the nerd stuff anyway, so I happily wait.
You're the one person I thought about.
And that's kind of was my sense. I think some of the information that you'd be most interested in that might not be an option unless you have that enhancement.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Any other questions?
Nope, no.
So the next thing that I'll just discuss is we did receive a non-concurrence. The board received the copy of it. You may have noticed the date is a bit older. This was one that we, with the department, had changed a process about when we got notification of non-concurrences, but this one was kind of in that transition period, so it sort of slipped up until we were closing out a case and then came across it. So that's why you see the date is a little off. But the issue is a non-concurrence of a finding. The department originally had we had a sustained finding, and the department went to an exonerated finding. And the SOP in question is 2-80-4L2 d VI. And what that states is the OIC shall handcuff the individual to a fixed object specifically designed for this purpose in such a manner that maximizes the comfort of the individual. The context of this policy is that it does fall under an area that mostly talks about holding cells. SOPs always require some interpretation of where they fall in things. Not every instant obviously has an exact SOP. So we apply things sometimes the best that seemed logical to us and at the time. One of the factors that the department utilized in the non-concurrence was that they pointed that out, basically, that this policy that you're utilizing is addressing holding cells, which is a different environment than the prisoner transport center, which is where this incident took place. The reason why our rationale was kind of applying it was that the prisoner transport center at the time was essentially closed and didn't have the full complement of people and everything going on that it normally does when it's open. So you had two officers that were utilizing it more, in our opinion anyway, in like a substation kind of scenario than the true PTC scenario. So that's kind of an initial difference of opinion of how it's looked at, and I can appreciate where they're coming from, but that's the rationale of why we kind of went down that road. In terms of there's again a difference of opinion, and that's fine, that's what happens, is that the department viewed the conduct of the individual in one light. We, the investigator, viewed it in a different light. So our concern was for the officer's safety in terms of how the prisoner was handled, in terms of not being secured and being free to roam about. The department was not as concerned about that individual's behavior, so that is why they felt that it was more appropriate to exonerate the finding because it wasn't a necessary act. So in this case, it's a difference of opinion. I understand where they're coming from. I don't entirely agree with it, but I do understand where it's coming from. So that's where non-concurrence has come about. So.
Perfect. Thank you. Do we have any questions?
No questions.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate it. With that being said, the next order of business will be our serious use of force cases. Our first one, line item A, will be APD case number 23-2020132, presented by member Bolians.
Thank you, Chair Calderon. For this case, the date was March 12th, 2023, approximately 23:52 hours. For the quick summary, officers established a lawful objective arrest of Mr. M for battery on a household member based on the statement by the individual, by his girlfriend and the mother. Officers began walking to the vehicle where Mr. M was sitting. Mr. M got out of the car and quickly began walking towards the officers and stopped once the officers were close to them. Mr. M kept stating he wanted his keys so he could leave after arguing for his keys. Mr. M said, "I guess I'm just going to walk home," and attempted to leave. The officers 1 and 2, successfully escorted Mr. M to the patrol vehicle. Once they arrived at the patrol unit, Mr. M refused to get inside the vehicle by stiffening his body, trying to kick the officers and preventing the officers from placing him inside of the unit. Officer 1 then grabbed Mr. M by his right arm and assisted him into the seat of the patrol unit. Mr. M got up, took a step, and lunged forward. Officer 1 perceived Mr. M attempting to flee, sidestepped to her to leave and placed both her hands on his back and pushed him towards the ground, causing Mr. M to fall to the ground. Mr. M continued to be uncooperative with the officers and continued to kick and try to trip them as the officers up. So the PRS was going to be placed on him. Both officers continued to maintain control of Mr. M and told him to get on his knees, which he refused to do so. Due to Mr. M not going to the ground according to the officers, ones then placed her right foot out to Mr. M's left leg and attempted to do a leg sweep. This action was ineffective, and Mr. M did not lose his balance. Officer 1 noticed that Mr. M did not lose his balance, attempted to sweep, so Officer 1 then grabbed Mr. M's left leg with her hand and pulled him forward and down while she lunged forward to the ground. Officer 2 then applied forward pressure to Mr. M's body with the left hand of his shoulder to continue to ensure Mr. M lost his balance and falling to the ground. The two forces were used were both level 3s, empty hand takedown techniques, both an attempted leg sweep and also takedown while in handcuffs. They tried to do it twice, so those are 2. The findings from IAFD, there were no policy violations, no personal violations, and then no admin violations. Post use of force, Mr. M was checked out by the rescue personnel on scene. He was then transported to Loveless Hospital, where he was accessed and released. Then he was transported for MDC and then booked. Mr. M sustained abrasions on his forehead, an abrasion on his left temple area, and Officer 1 sustained some redness on the knee, and her uniform was torn at the same location on her knee. Mr. M was charged with battery against a household member for two charges, and then resisting, evading, and obstructing an officer. There were no, outside those other use of forces for empty-handed takedowns, there were no other uses of force for the individual, and the investigation for IAFD was found to be objectionable and reasonable in APD policy.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any questions for Member Boyans at the moment? Perfect. Now, thank you, Commander. Do we have any questions for the Commander? No? Okay. Do you have a brief or anything?
Nope.
Nope. DPOA?
Nothing to add more than what you read.
Yeah. Perfect.
No, in this case, pretty straightforward, so.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, give me 1 second. My notes. Final question, no questions to ask either, anybody? Cool, perfect. With that being said, do the board members agree with the findings of Internal Affairs Force Division investigation?
Yes.
Perfect. I make a motion that the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board affirms and upholds the findings of APD's Internal Affairs Force Division investigation for APD case number 23-00200132. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Parela, may I get a roll call vote?
Member Bolianis?
Approved.
Member Budenaro?
Approved.
Member Calderon?
Approved.
Member Weimark?
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Parela. Moving on to our next order of business will be line item B, APD case number 23-00017255, presented by myself. Date of case was March 2nd of 2023. Location would be the intersection of Zuni Road and Utah Southeast. On March 2nd of 2023, Officer 1 witnessed a male individual, later identified as Mr. H, jaywalking and proceeds to trespass onto private property, which had been condemned prior. Officer approached Mr. H and advised him he was being detained and not free to leave. When Officer 1 asked Mr. H for his name, he concealed his ID by giving false information. Officer 1 then asked Mr. H to put his hands behind his back, and he was handcuffed. Officer number 1 advised Mr. H that they were unable to locate his information and that he was now committing a crime of concealing identification. Officer began escorting Mr. H to the patrol unit. As they approached the unit, Mr. H began to resist by twisting his body around towards the officers, moving his handcuffed hands as far as he could towards the left side while raising his left arm. Mr. H still stretching his hands to his left side. Officer number 2 grabbed Mr. H's right hand and attempted to reposition it back to the center of Mr. H's back. As he did so, Mr. H twisted and bent his arms while saying, "Ow, ow." Mr. H continued his attempts to break free from the officer's grasps while still holding on to Mr. H. Officer number 2 attempted a leg sweep on Mr. H's right leg. Mr. H didn't fall, but momentarily lost his balance. Almost simultaneously, Officer number 1 initiated his own leg sweep on Mr. H's left leg. The combination of both officers' leg sweeps forced Mr. H to the ground. During Mr. H's continued active resistance, Officer 1 was kicked in the chest. Officer number 1 then utilized a closed fist strike to the backside of Mr. H's right leg to the soft tissue area between the knee and buttocks. Officer number 2 placed his right knee in between Mr. H's handcuffed left arm and the ground, holding it in place while Mr. H was being searched by officers. During the search, Mr. H stated, "Ow." Mr. H was rolled over to his side as the search was completed. Mr. H was then lifted to his feet and escorted to the back seat of Officer number 1's patrol vehicle. The individual's behaviors while in custody, he was evaluated by AFR at the scene and transported to Loveless downtown where he was medically cleared. Injuries sustained by officers and individuals. Officers were not injured. Mr. H had an abrasion on the top of his right hand and a scratch on his right wrist. The individual was charged with pedestrian on roadway, concealing ID, resisting, evading, and obstructing an officer, and 2 felony warrants. Mr. H was involved in additional use of force case number F2023-000126, which occurred on April 14th of 2023 after this incident, and at the time was still under investigation of IFD at the publishing of that report. Policy violations, violations of personnel rules, violations of administrative rules / regulations were not identified. Tactics, training, policy, and supervision, no deficiencies or concerns were identified. On equipment, Officer number 1's OBRD as well as magazine fell off possibly from the kick from Mr. H at the time of the incident. An additional equipment deficiency was the CAD system was down. As a result, initial CAD number that was generated by Mark 43 was a 23-030253. When the CAD system came back online, a new case number was generated, which was 23-00172555. The level of forces that were used was level 3 by Officer 1, empty hand takedown, leg sweep, and handcuffs. Officer number 1, an empty hand strike. Officer number 2, empty hand takedown, leg sweep, and handcuffs. Level 1 use of force was Officer number 2, an empty hand control times 2. Summary of findings based on the totality of circumstances. I believe that the force was reasonable, minimal, and necessary, as well as IAFD. The use of force was investigated by IAFD and found to be objectively reasonable within APD policy. Okay. With that being said, sir, do we have any questions before I entertain his? Go ahead, sir.
I have no questions.
No questions. Oh, I'd love to hear that.
No questions.
Is there anything to add, sir?
Nothing to answer.
CPOA?
No, just this was, proactive policing duty as opposed to a call for service. This is the type of work that these teams are supposed to be doing to address these types of issues, quality of life type issues. So the difference being is there were some other individuals on scene that did provide their identity and it didn't escalate to this, whereas this individual chose not to, and so this is sort of the end result of that.
I agree with that. Perfect. With that being said, do we agree with the findings of IAFD?
Yes.
Perfect. I make a motion that the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board affirms and upholds the findings of APD Internal Affairs Force Division investigation for APD case number 23-00172555. May I get a second, please? Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Barrera, may I get a roll call vote?
Member Bolianis?
Approved.
Member Budenaro?
Approved.
Member Calderon?
Approved.
Member Weimer?
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barrera. Maybe we should say uphold. That's all I changed to uphold.
Yeah, okay.
Moving on to the next agenda item would be APD case number 23-00185545, which will be presented by Member Budenaro for next meeting. Due to technical issues prior, he wasn't able to review the case fully and equitably. So with that being said, I make a motion.
Before, I do want to make a request to Commander Norris, specifically around this one. There was listed a potential policy violation, so I just wanted to ask Commander Norris for next meeting, when we're going over this, to just be able to provide a little more insight into that policy violation.
Okay.
Because I know that's what's cited here, so I want to give you all the time in the world to prepare for that one.
I can tell you what it is now.
Yes, sir. Oh, no, sir. Yeah, sorry.
Next
The
one.
reason why I can't is
Next-
because
Okay.
I need him to present his portion first, and then you
Gotcha.
can present yours, just so it keeps the theme with everything else.
Okay,
So thank you for that.
sure.
For your willingness, I appreciate that. So with that being said, I make a motion that APD case number 23-00185545 be tabled to next month's board meeting. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Barela, make a roll call vote, please.
Member Bolianis?
Approved.
Member Budenaro?
Approved.
Member Calderon?
Approve.
Member Weimer?
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barela. Thank you, sir, as well. Appreciate that. Moving on to the next order of business is the officer-involved shooting cases. During this month, we have no officer-involved shooting cases that we reviewed during this board meeting, as we are taking on these cases at the moment. With that being said, the next order of business is in custody death case. APD case number 24-0003814, presented by member Weimark. Ma'am, the floor is yours.
Okay. Date of incidence was January 14th, 2024. Time of incident was 8:57 p.m. to 2:54 a.m. The location was Santa Fe and Northwest Beat 221. The involved individuals were 7 officers, most of whom, or 6 of them were enhanced CIT, and 1 of them was not. The officers are by no means the total number of personnel involved with the incident. They are the ones identified in the IOPS investigation, IFD, investigation to the in-custody death. ECC received a call about ME. Oh, ME was the involved individual, making suicidal statements establishing grounds to intervene for a self-inflicting injury. He had made sexual advances towards the caller's minor niece and friends. ME had battered the caller and shot a firearm in the residence and would not allow anyone to leave. When the officers arrived at 20:57 hours, the caller and the minor children were already out of the house. Charges were established against ME after speaking with the caller and minor children. After checking into ME's background, RTCC found that ME had a history of battery and assault. ME was barricaded in the house and would not surrender. A criminal felony arrest and search warrant was issued. ME's continued barricade in the house resulted in tactical activation, bomb squad activation, and SWAT call out. AFR, the CNT, and the K9 unit were already also called out. At 21:05 hours, the officers approached the house with a force array. ME refused to exit. At 21:15 hours, the officer began making PA announcements to ME. At 21:21 hours, Sergeant X spoke with the caller, who changed her statement, stating the dispute was only verbal and ME had shot at the floor and made suicidal statements. He had not pointed the gun at her. At 21:38 hours, officers tried calling ME on the phone 4 times. Each time there was no answer and the voicemail wasn't set up. At 21:41 hours after interviewing the caller, and minor children, the following charges were established: 3 counts of aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, false imprisonment, enticement of a child, negligent use of a deadly weapon, and battery of a household member. At 21:53, gunshots were heard from inside the house. And at 22:14, there was no sound coming from the house. At 22:42 hours, ME was heard yelling from inside the house. 4 minutes later, another gunshot was heard. At 23:19, tactical officers arrived, relieving the field officers. At 007 hours, the crisis negotiating team took over the PA transmission. 10 minutes later, officers heard popping sounds which may or may not be gunshots. And then 28 minutes later, there were loud noises coming from the house. At 02:12 hours, flashbangs were deployed. Officer 1 did side 1, Officer 2 did side 2. There was no movement inside the house. A rook was used to move ME's truck and the side fence to gain a visual of the house. An interior drone and a robot operated by Sergeant X entered the house. After viewing the kitchen and the living room, they went into the bedroom, where a pink blanket was seen on the floor, surrounded by significant amounts of blood and a human foot sticking out of the end. The drone and robot were exited. Tactical officers emptied the house. They located ME, and AFR determined he was deceased. There was no use of force, as the officers did not make contact with ME until after it was determined he was deceased. All OBRD videos were reviewed for every officer that was on the scene. Officer 17's actions were deemed within policy. No misconduct was observed. All written reports were reviewed and were consistent with OBRD recordings. The SWAT activation report was reviewed and is consistent with ORBD recordings and written reports. Potential misconduct. Policy violation of the standards operating procedures. No violations were identified. Violation of personnel rules and regulations. No violations were identified. Violation of administrative instructions. No violations were identified. All officers were determined to be in policy. Ooh, Commander Johnston.
Thank you, Ms. Weimark, for that long brief.
It had to be a long brief. I
It did.
apologize.
Yes.
It was one of the most, it's one of the most involved I've seen since I started doing reports.
And you did a very good job of putting all the pieces together in a succinct manner, because it could have been way longer.
Well, I knew I had to focus only on the 7 officers because the issue was use of force.
Correct.
I do have a question about Sergeant X. He's not listed as an involved officer, but he's there interviewing someone.
That's a good observation. So there is a process change that we have implemented for these in-custody death situations. Because an in-custody death, on scene, it was determined that there was no use of force reported and no use of force observed. On these ones, what the past practice was is that we would take the first couple officers or first supervisor, and we would just choose to target them with a policy violation that was our mechanism for opening up an investigation. In this one, the policy violation, if you guys read it, it basically talks about contacting the Emergency Communications Center. It's not the officer's responsibility or a sergeant's responsibility or a lieutenant's responsibility to make those notifications and get internal affairs out there. It was used as a tracking mechanism, and we have since changed it to where we have made it a IC investigation instead of an I investigation. And we're not just picking officers to investigate. We're still investigating the entire incident with all officers, all OBRDs. As you read in the notes, all OBRD is watched, and we're looking for all potential uses of force, and did we follow our training process and procedures when we're looking at this in-custody death. For the in-custody death in this investigation, it was all within our policies, and the ECC stuff was unfounded. There was a spin-off case to this one for a officer who was an original responder and then was then on the perimeter. And basically it was for professionalism. He was sustained for not being professional in his interactions with the citizen that was interacting with them on the outer perimeter. So while we said everything in this was in policy and there were no policy violations related to the in-custody death, we still did find something that was ancillary to it, and we did handle that as well. So that's how we handle things going forward. Is we're just going to do an in-custody death review of the whole case, and then if we do see a policy violation, we're going to start an extra internal investigation on whatever that policy violation may be.
I did hear that, officer, and I did wonder, but I didn't see it in the body of the
Yes, it was
report,
handled
so
in
I left it alone
in another case.
as another one.
Yes.
As it's an in-custody death, is it standard for those to be on use of force reports because there was no violation?
So in this one, it was not treated as a use of force. So IAFD, I believe, did respond to the scene.
I do apologize, yeah. Go on, I'm sorry.
They did respond to the scene, but because there is no force used, that investigation then gets taken on by the Professional Standards Division, which is my division. And We just do a complete review on it. And like I said, the original style that we would do it, we would just pick that inert, I want to use the word erroneous, but it's not erroneous completely. It was used as a tracking mechanism to ensure that we could track in custody deaths. We found a better way to do it this year was just to create an in custody death incident number within our tracking mechanisms. Instead of using an I number, which is what we use for all of our misconduct investigations, we're now using an IC number, which is for in custody deaths. So I can easily and quickly, instead of looking up a very long SOP number, I just look for all ICs in the year 2024, which is much faster, much more efficient, and it also prevents us from putting things onto personnel's discipline record showing that they were unfounded for something that they never did, that we knew that they never did.
That's all I have, thank you.
I do have one question, and I could be misreading it, and it's possible. So there were, besides the main individual, Mr. E, I thought I saw there were other individuals in that domicile, and at some point, and I could be misreading it, that those individuals left. So it was only Mr. E back in the house at the time the last gunshots were heard. Was that?
That is correct.
Okay, so I totally could be crazy. So we were reviewing this actually this week, is SOP 2-20, talking about hostage situations, barricaded individuals, and it just happened to come up. I find it very interesting. So when, and I could be misremembering too, is if there's an individual just themselves barricaded even with a firearm, it is APD policy to not engage and just leave that individual. Is that?
Not exactly. So let me dive down that just a little bit. I'm going to give you some if-thens and then relate it back to this one. So let's say I'm at my house and I am saying I want to hurt myself with a firearm and there's no one else that's in danger inside that home. We are still going to attempt to engage that person, mostly because it's a risk to themselves, it's a danger to themselves, and we want to be able to offer them all the help and assistance that we can. We want to try and get them to a hospital, but we're not going to go into that home and forcibly take them out in that situation outside of other exigent circumstances where we have probable cause or real suspicion to believe that somebody else is in danger or that a crime has occurred. For this specific situation that we're in, this individual had also committed felony crimes. The firearm had been discharged. There was other things that happened. So in this case, we did go to the district attorney's office. We did obtain an arrest warrant and a search warrant. So at that point, we had the reason to detain the individual and reason to enter the home. So those two things existed, which allowed us to do those things, which is also part of our standard operating procedure.
Is there a situation, just out of curiosity, right? So if those individuals left, even after those, would there be a situation where would you guys have disengaged and not entered, or because those other federal or felony acts were committed, it does not matter, you guys have to go in?
With those other felony acts, we are going to go in.
Okay.
Obviously, let's say the district attorney denied the search warrant and denied the arrest warrant, then we're going to do a disengagement. Just because we believe that we have that probable cause and real suspicion, without a further exigent circumstance, we're not going to enter that without those warrants.
Yeah, I just because that policy was up, I just was curious and wanted to
absolutely
make that clarification.
Yeah, and there are some other further scenarios to where I've been the incident commander on them, and we have an individual who wants to harm themselves. They're not a danger to anyone else, and it's almost like they're trying to. I have a specific instance in mind where they were trying to get us to go to the house so they could cause an encounter, and that was their intent from the beginning of the call. And at that point, what I do is I have the officers try and make telephone contact, which in this case they did. The person said, yes, I want to come here and get in a shootout with you. I want you to cause harm to me. And at that point, I authorized a non-engagement. So we didn't go to the house on that one because of what was on the call, the information that we had, and the real-time contact that I had with the individual.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing and thank you for the clarification. I think that was helpful for me.
Any other?
Oh, yes, it was.
Perfect. Any other questions? Perfect. Thank you, sir.
All right, thank
CPOA,
you.
do you have anything to add to that? Sorry.
No, as the commander pointed out, there was that side issue that was discovered through the course of the investigation, and the process changed, so those things he had already addressed. The only other thing I would just raise, just in case, as board members were reviewing things, you may have noticed that there was a 40mm deployment, but it was not against a person, so therefore it's not use of force. It was against a camera. So just in case that was a question that may have come up, that was why that is.
Perfect. Thank you. Any further questions? Perfect. Do we believe that the findings were appropriate?
Yes.
Perfect.
Agreed.
Perfect. So with that being said, I make a motion that the Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board affirms and upholds the findings APD's in custody death investigation for APD case number 24-0003814. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Barela, may I get a roll call vote?
Member Bolianis,
Affirm.
Member Budinaro,
Affirmed.
Member Calderon,
Uphold.
Member Weimar.
Affirmed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barela. I appreciate that. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you. Thank you, board members, for presenting your cases. With that being said, the next order of business will be appeals. During this month's board meeting, we have no appeal case that's been requested to come before the board. With that being said, the next order of business is going to be the CPOA board review of Garrity materials. We had no Garrity materials reviewed during this month's meeting. The next order of business is going to be meeting with counsel regarding pending litigation or personnel issues. We have no pending litigation or personnel issues to review during this month's meeting. Moving on to the next order of business will be reports from CPOA-B subcommittees. Line item A is going to be Policy and Procedures Review Subcommittee presented by Member Bolian.
Thank you, Chair Calderon. Yes, I filled in for this last meeting on December 5th at 3 for the chair, Member Oliver. With this particular one, we had APD there to actually discuss two off-cycle policies. 1-6 was the ride-along policy, and then 2-31, which was the emergency tactical policy, which I had requested. So it was great for me to be there. We had some really good conversation. There are a couple of action items that are going to be coming back to us on the responses from APD. So I'm looking forward to those in the next couple of, probably later this month or early next month. So hopefully we can present those next meeting. There is, later in the agenda, I do want to call out that we do have a response back from SOP 3-21 that I just want to make sure we chat about later in the agenda, and we can go from there. The next meeting for the Policy and Procedure Review Subcommittee will be January 2nd at 3 p.m. Back in Dissel, in the basement. I believe that's where it's going to be held.
Perfect, thank you.
And I stand for any questions if any board members have any questions.
Any questions, sir?
Not at this time.
Perfect. Thank you, and of course, as always, it will be posted online prior for the public to attend. Perfect. Thank you, sir. With that, the next order of business is going to be discussion and possible action items. Line item A is going to be APD policy recommendations. Ms. Emily, yeah, please come up real quick. And so with this, I'm going to change the process a little bit to make it a little easier for note-taking and approval. So as we go through each of these recommendations, each recommendation will get a vote on it individually. So it's more clear in the minutes that actions taken on said stuff. And then, of course, on the no recommendations will be a group, but I'll list every single policy out and go through that process. So with that being said, line item APD policy A, point 1, point A, so SOP 2-19, response to behavioral health issues. Ms. Emily, the floor is yours.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, cool. So we had a discussion about a possible recommendation for SOP 219, response to behavioral health issues. And that was concerning making sure that the policy accounts for the individual that's deemed dangerous to be transported in restraints and when they're in the care of EMS. I reached out to Commander Bartlett to get some more clarity on that item, which we had discussed at the subcommittee meeting, and I'm still awaiting a response. So I'm not sure what the right approach is here. We can wait to vote on this item until I hear back. I don't think it's due for at least another week, so we can talk about what the board wants to do with regards to this recommendation over email.
Stand by real quick. CPOA.
Yeah, we wouldn't be able to discuss the business per se over email.
Right.
So the board would have to just decide to kind of delegate to us the option to respond to that particular agenda item on behalf of the board, essentially. One thing I will say about it is we had this discussion a little bit at the policy subcommittee. In general, is we can't dictate for other agencies, and we're not trying to, but this concern of being under restraints or not under the care of EMS, it is up to EMS to decide whether they feel it's appropriate to have, or if their safety is of concern.
Right.
So we can wait for more clarification, and we can kind of decide if the board wants to say that, or the board can make a recommendation that we'll put forth in that 35-day period now that we would put forth on the document. So it's kind of however you want to do it, but yeah, we wouldn't really be able to
Right, we'll
clarify
discuss it
per
over
se for
email.
email.
Right. My thought process would be that we entrust that duty to the CPOA to make the best recommendation based on the information you get back from the commander. Do we have any dissent to that?
No, I definitely agree that we should do that. And I think specifically for this motion, we should call out, specifically, we're delegating the authority to the CPOA for this and then set the policy just for the transparency, just as a one-time thing for right now, right? Because we want it specifically for this week.
Right, I want to ensure that they get the right, that you feel you get the information and the questions answered before you make any recommendations, so I don't want to force anything upon that.
Yeah.
Are we okay with that?
I'm good with it, yeah.
I make a motion that we entrust the CPOA to propose a recommendation to APD on our behalf prior to the expiration of the time limit once Emily receives more information from the commander. And this is going to be for SOP 2-19, response to behavioral health issues. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Parela, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Member Bolianis,
Affirm.
Member Budenaro,
Affirm.
Member Calderon,
Affirm.
Member Weimar.
Approve.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Parela. Moving on to the next agenda item will be line item B, which will be SOP 3-50, formerly 3-22 and 3-27 of forms control. Ms. Emily?
So for this recommendation, this policy has a requirement that the PPRB review and approve of a translated vital document. The PPRB already reviews and approves of the English version of the document. And so the recommendation here is to actually remove the requirement that they have to review and approve the translated version, because if the member doesn't speak that language, then they're not really reviewing anything.
Perfect, thank you. That's short and sweet. Do you have anything to add, Executive Director?
No, I mean, it's one of those things that probably sounds good on paper to make sure that you review, but when you actually think about the practicalities of it, obviously the board members don't speak all the various languages, so.
Right.
Just for clarity.
No, thank you, appreciate that. Any questions?
No.
Dissent for that?
No.
I support that, because yeah, it's an additional need, and it's not going to be fulfilled because, like you said, that person doesn't speak that language. Okay. So with that being said, I make a motion that we approve the recommendation for SOP 3-50, formerly 3-22 and 3-27 forms control. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Varela, may I get a roll call vote?
Member Bolianis,
Approved.
Member Budenaro,
Approved.
Member Calderon,
Approve.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Moving on to line item C, SOP 1-78, formerly 4-6, police service aids, PSA program. Ms. Emily?
So for this one, when we were reviewing the use of force suite, it was relayed to us that PSAs are now authorized to use OC spray, which is technically considered level 2 use of force. And in 256, use of force reporting by department personnel, which would include PSAs, are mandated to report and document their OC spray use. In the PSA policy, which is 178 here, neither the authorization to use the OC spray is made clear in the policy, and there isn't any language surrounding the required reporting. And it was also relayed to us that the department is intending to put out a special order that makes it such that PSAs don't have to report their OC spray usage. And so we want to make sure that that 178, police service aid, is in accordance with 256, use of force reporting by department personnel, which does obligate them to report their OC use, OC spray usage.
Perfect, thank you. Director?
Yes, the addition or the sort of carve out for PSAs does give us concern. The policy on reporting use of force is pretty clear about how it works, and that should apply to, as it says, all department personnel. We were provided some initial explanation from APD that the use of OC spray is considered as self-defense and not a use of force. However, that logic doesn't really tie with or make sense to us, because all use of force is in some way a self-defense. You're defending, yourself or the life of another when you are utilizing that force in some cases. Obviously, there's detention and other things, but that core premise is what is for force. So saying that self-defense is not a use of force is not making sense. So we would like the PSA policy to specifically give guidance on the OC spray and then retain the same language, obviously, for the use of force reporting and not have any special order carve out for the PSAs on that.
I personally support that, because eventually these PSAs will become police officers typically, right? The majority of them will be. And so for there to be carved out a special rule just for them, just because they are PSAs, we're still working on behalf of the city of Albuquerque to the citizens. So I think that's imperative that the standard is across the board the same for all personnel of APD, right? Especially if you're carrying OC spray. Yes, it is for self-defense, but as well, you're held to that standard of working for the public. So if you're using it, something's going on, right? It's not just a normal interaction. You're not just spraying people for the hell of it. So I believe this recommendation is needed, and I would love to see the outcome of this as well from the department.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I firmly agree with what everyone's saying about this, because I want to also see the data too, right? If you're not reporting, that means there's no data on the even the self-defense, right? Called self-defense, not use of force. Fine. I want to see the data on that and get those investigations too, and I want to see those reports from IAFD too on those, because that would be fascinating to me. Saying, okay, well, how often are PSAs having to use self-defense?
Right.
I want to know that, right? Because then that's a whole nother conversation to have. But until we get that data, we can't even have that conversation.
Right.
So yeah, I very much agree with the CPOA's recommendation with this, and would then ask IAFD to start bringing those reports to us once that data is collected.
Perfect, thank you. Questions, comments?
I think for me, it comes down to a simple legal question. should the city be held liable for the actions of a PSA? And if the answer is yes, then I support that, absolutely.
That's a good point.
Yeah, I agree. Like, if I, a civilian, pepper spray somebody, there's gonna be an investigation, no matter what happens at the end of it, right?
Any self-defense that we would do, and we would have to call, as law-abiding citizens, we have to report it, we would have an investigation as civilians. So why is PSA cut off from that? Even if they were civilians, they would have to report it.
I agree with that. So, thank you guys for that. With that being said, it seems that we all agree with that recommendation. So I make a motion that we approve this recommendation for SOP 1-78, formerly 4-6, Police Service Aid PSA program. May I get a second, please?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Barrera, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Member Bolianitz,
Approved.
Member Budenaro,
Approved.
Member Calderon,
Approved.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passes unanimously.
Perfect, thank you. Thank you, Ms. Emily, for that recommendation on that one. And yeah, spotting that out, because that's significant. So I appreciate that. With that being said, our next item on the agenda will be Section 2, the no recommendations. Ms. Emily, do you have any comment on the no recommendation list?
No.
Okay, perfect. CPOA Director, Executive Director, no comments either? Any board members, do you have any questions on any of these SOPs that are listed below on the no recommendation section?
No.
No.
Perfect. Perfect. With that being said, there are no recommendations for the following SOPs. SOP 2-32, formerly 1-40, exposure to blood and bodily fluids. SOP 2-93, formerly 2-35, child abduction and missing child investigations. SOP 2-20, formerly 2-42, hostage situations, barricaded individuals, and tactical threat assessments. SOP 2-23, formerly 2-45, use of canine unit. SOP 2-72, formerly 2-91, procedures for serious crime callouts. SOP 2-95, undercover high-risk vehicle containment procedures. SOP 2-98, gunshot detection procedure. Then SOP 3-11, formerly 3-02 and 3-2, command staff responsibilities. Once again, there's no recommendations for any of those policies. Moving on to our next order of business will be line B, APD response to policy recommendations. Line item 1, SOP 3-21, formerly 3-72, scheduled and unscheduled leave. Prior to Member Molian's talking about this, CPOA, do you have anything to add to this first, or I may allow him to speak first? Okay, Member Molian?
Well, I was going to have Ms. Emily give her response, because I want to hear the response, because we, and I'm going to butcher this, we did give a response back, and so I would just ask Emily to do a quick recap for us.
Sure. So we had made a recommendation that APD add something into this policy to the effect of requiring personnel to set up automatic replies when they're taking a leave of absence, or not even a leave of absence, just a leave exceeding 1 week prior to commencing that leave, and requiring that the supervisor coordinate with IT to set up automatic replies in the event that the employee doesn't set it up prior to leaving, so that our investigators have a sense of when personnel will be back or who their point of contact should be in order to proceed with their investigation. Obviously, as we know, we have really tight timelines, and so it's important to know when APD employees are out of the office to understand how, the timelines are going to work. So the policyholder said that they do not feel it is necessary to require APD employees to address other department requests via policy. That was our response.
Thank you. So during the subcommittee policy, when this was relayed, I was perturbed at the response. So I take other departments out of it as civilians. If I'm working with a police officer and they have a week break and I'm curious of anything, right? And I reach out to them and I don't hear something for a week, I would be irate, honestly. And so even specifically, we just said out of office for a week to set up an automated response just to, hey, I'm out of office. from a professional perspective outside of APD, personally, and Chair Calderon, correct me if this is for you, if I am gone even for a day, it is required we put an out of office to say, hey, we're even gone on a Friday, coming back on Monday, reach out to X person. And so the fact that that people are saying, oh no, we're not even needing to do that, I might have lost my temper a little bit and thought that was not an acceptable response from the policyholder to even think about the citizens and other constituents who might be working with officers when they might be out of town. And I hope our APD officers get PTO and are taking that time and that personal time, and I want them to take that. So don't take this as a criticism against that. It's, I want it out in office just to let me know as a civilian, hey, I'm out of office, I'll be back X date. If you need an emergency assistance on your case or whatever, reach out to X.
I agree, to some sort, right? Obviously, case investigation is a little different from things, but as well, just an alert that you're out of office, right? It kind of puts the person at ease to know when to expect a response of some sort, right? Or at least timeline. CPOA?
So when we made the recommendation, of course, it did sort of focus on the CPOA's, I guess you'd say, need or whatever, but it also, to what Member Baliana said, it's not just us, and that's where I think perhaps this recommendation got a little lost with the policy owner specifically, thinking that we were just asking for something for just us, and when we're not. Everyone needs to know in a professional environment when somebody's going to be available and when to know when to expect, and especially if there's tight timelines. It's not just us, it's IAPS. Now, of course, IAPS and the internal have some ability and benefit to be able to look up like an APD payroll and things like that. But our experience is sometimes APD payroll is unable to respond quickly, and so it's not something that we would have access to readily. Same thing, any citizen, like Member Bolianos just said, if you have a victim who is trying to get evidence to an officer, or who is, especially on the detectives and the follow-ups, if you're trying to get information to that individual and they just sort of drop off the radar for a period of time, you're going to be frustrated. You're going to be, how are they really taking this seriously, et cetera, et cetera. So it seems like a small ask, I guess you'd say, to reflect a respect for the greater populace. So with these responses, so when we submit these responses right now, we are following the process that APD has requested, meaning that we use a smart sheet automatic form that goes through the policy unit and is responded to by the policy owner. That is, we do that as long as it works. The ordinance actually talks about referring our policy recommendations to the chief and obtaining a response from the chief. So in a situation where we think it is strong enough to advise the chief that, hey, this policy recommendation was rejected by your policy owner, which he may or may not be aware of, because of course there's a lot of delegation that goes on. We do have, through the ordinance, the ability to essentially send that recommendation to the chief and get an actual response from the chief as to whether or not he agrees with that or signs off on that. So that would be, at least in this case, yes, it's a minor issue, but it, to me, is not so minor. And so I think it would be worth going that avenue if the board agreed with that.
Okay. Lieutenant Nico, in your professional opinion, how often do you feel that is used, right, the out of office feature on Outlook, right? And how often do you see it, I guess?
So you're asking how often is this actually used?
Yes.
Quite frequently, in my opinion and in my experience. As far as I know, especially in the academy, we're very adamant that we need to make sure that the out of office notifications are made, because it's important, not only for anybody we're trying to notify, but also for someone trying to get a hold of us. I'm shocked that we're having this conversation. I thought it was happening all the time, and yeah, I mean, I know I'm very diligent about doing it, and I agree with what you were saying as far as notifying the public. It's important. It really is. So,
Yeah, I can see the distinction between field services and, of course, and the academy, because it's a little more tight-knit, and communication's a goal, right? They're constantly a communication goal there. Okay, that answers that question. Thank you. I just had to make sure, like, my perception wasn't skewed or anything like that.
no, sir.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Sir. Sure.
I guess I'm a little bit more baffled now, is probably the right term to use for me, is that, you know, we're hearing that it's already commonplace to use. And as it should be, and I'm not saying that this should be commonplace, it is standard business practices.
Right.
Standard good community practices. So I would agree with Director McDermott that, yeah, it sounds small, but this is something I think we should bring to the chief to say, hey, like, and unfortunately, I'm still very perturbed of the response. Because even if it is interdepartmental, this is still a professional courtesy. This is still professionalism.
Right.
And I think this is and this might be harsh, a complete unprofessional response, and unprofessional to even have a conversation. Like, they were not even willing to engage in the conversation.
Right.
And that's what frustrates me, when it's already a common practice within an APD, with Lieutenant Naiko just sharing that this is common practice, that they're training new officers to do this. And so I'm sorry, I'm just very little animated about this, but it just really ground my gears a little bit.
Fair. Any comments, additional board members?
Whenever I've emailed anybody on APD, I routinely receive that response.
Not at this time. I have some other questions, though.
Pertaining to this?
Yeah,
What?
but I'm not sure if it's relevant. I was just thinking about undercovers, the names they use. And if I'm a criminal mastermind, which I've never met one, but if I were one and I wanted to know the whereabouts of somebody that I might suspect might be police, and I emailed it and I got that response back confirming he was indeed police. I'm just curious, do undercovers use their real names? Do they?
Well, do keep in mind, so the emails that we're talking about are CABQ city emails. So
Right.
there's already the knowledge that they are a, city employee, a city officer, because when you look at it, it says, police and all that. So that part, I can appreciate the concern, but that wouldn't be what we're referring to here. This would be your straight APD employee, not trying to, be
Be slick,
undercover or
okay.
anything like that.
Normal
And-
operations.
And a lot of times, again, officers, some do and some don't. And so the idea about policy is to have consistency and have it across the board.
Right.
And, even if it was something that wasn't sanctionable, I mean, I'm saying it would be lowest level, if anything. But just that piece in the policy that tells that expectation, tells the employees that that's the expectation, so that whether it's CPOA, whether it's IPS, whether it's the community, whether it's, whoever it is trying to reach that person, hey, guess what? They're not going to respond right away. And we have officers who are gone for months.
Right.
And they're gone for, military service, thanks for that. And they are gone for FMLA, and they're gone for all these different reasons for extended periods of time. And again, if somebody is trying to get a hold of them, we see those complaints. We see the complaints of, I've been trying to reach officer so-and-so, and I can't. And, and when we kind of find out, it's, because they actually weren't available for whatever that legitimate reason is.
I want to be clear, I'm with them on 100%. I agree. It's got to be professional, or what's the point? My only concern is, just want to make sure that no officer is ever put in any form of being compromised.
And so for additional clarification, we're talking about general day-to-day business.
Right.
Not covert ops and stuff like that. At that point, it's a separate thing, right? Okay, real quick before we vote on that, because I do want to use the chief's option. in the recommendation, we put that the supervisor worked with IT, is what Emily said on her proposal. I don't think that part's necessary because they can set up the out of office themselves, right? Like that sergeant can talk to his officer before they go on leave. Hey, make sure you set this up, right?
Well, the idea is that in case the officer, say, goes on military leave and he is gone now, then there would be that option to be able to do it for them in case they don't actually get it done.
I support that as the cascading event, right? And we put in there that, this leadership, that sergeant or team lead, whatever goes down to it, works with the officer to set up themselves prior to leave, right? The due diligence. And then worst case, if that doesn't happen, then we have that backup of working with IT, right?
I think that was our intention. Maybe
Okay.
we didn't word it quite right.
Oh,
But that was the
maybe we
intention.
just word that in there on that aspect. I mean, as a backup, that IT can, and I know they can as well. 'Cause I've done it myself at my work. So for staff that are either gone, fired, whatever it is. So with that being said, we'll make this a motion because I want it to be voted on. I make a motion that we authorize the use of pushing this recommendation to the chief of police for a formal response and awareness of our recommendation for SOP 3-21, formerly 3-72, scheduled and unscheduled leave. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, sir. He's fast, hang on. Ms. Barela, make it a roll call vote, please.
Member Bolianis?
Approved.
Member Budenaro?
Approved.
Member Calderon?
Approve.
Member Weimark?
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barela. With that being said, do we have any other comments before I move on? You already said enough. Thank you. With that being said, the next order of business is other business. Do any board members or CPOA staff or any city staff have anything else to present during this board meeting? Fabulous. Love to hear that. With that being said, the next order of business is adjournment. The next regularly scheduled board meeting will be held on Thursday, January 9th, 2025 at 5 p.m. in the Vincent E. Griego Chambers. With that being said, I make a motion for adjournment for this month's board meeting. Can I get a second?
Seconded.
Second. Damn.
Thank you, sir. You got it.
I was trying to give you time.
Ms. Barrera, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Member Bolianis?
Approved.
Member Budenaro?
Approved.
Member Calderon?
Approve.
Member Weimark?
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barrera. With that being said, y'all have a great night, and we'll see y'all next year.
Next year.
Mhm.